Smallpox had been declared eradicated. The global vaccination campaign was over, the disease was beaten, and the world had moved on. So when a woman in Birmingham fell ill with a fever in the late summer of 1978, no one's first thought was the most feared virus in human history. But it was smallpox, and it had come from a laboratory one floor above her workplace. Janet Parker was a medical photographer at the University of Birmingham Medical School. She had not been vaccinated recently. She had not traveled anywhere dangerous. She had no known contact with any infected person. What she did have was an office located in the same building as one of the UK's authorized smallpox research facilities, run by Professor Henry Bedson. Parker became ill, was eventually diagnosed with smallpox, and died on the 11th of September, 1978. She was the last person recorded to have died from smallpox anywhere on Earth. That fact alone demands an explanation. How does the world's last smallpox death occur not in a remote village without health care, not during the eradication campaign itself, but inside a British university after eradication had already been declared? To understand what went wrong, you have to understand what researchers like Professor Bedson were legitimately trying to do. Eradication was a triumph, but it raised an urgent scientific question. Once the virus no longer circulated in human populations, what did we still need to learn about it? And how safely could we study it? Authorized laboratories retained live samples precisely to continue that research, to study the virus's biology, its behavior, and the immunity it generated. The science had a clear and defensible purpose. The danger was in the gap between that purpose and the physical conditions in which the work was being carried out. Smallpox is caused by Variola virus, a pathogen so dangerous that even after eradication, only a handful of specially designated facilities worldwide were permitted to keep and handle it. The logic of biosafety for a virus like this rests on the principle of containment: physical barriers, negative air pressure rooms, protective equipment, and strict protocols that prevent any particle of the virus from reaching an unprotected person. When those barriers work, the research is safe. When they fail, even partially, the consequences can reach anyone in the building. Professor Bedson's laboratory had a documented history of concerns. Inspections of the Birmingham facility in the period leading up to 1978 had identified that the lab did not fully meet the safety standards required for working with Variola. The facility had been reviewed and found wanting. There were plans to upgrade or close it, yet the research continued. That tension between what safety standards required and what was actually in place is the critical organizational failure at the center of this case. The Shooter Inquiry, the official government investigation led by microbiologist R.A. Shooter, was established specifically to determine how Parker had been infected and why the accident had been allowed to become possible. The inquiry focused not only on the proximate question of how the virus reached Parker, but on the broader question of how a known substandard facility had continued operating with a pathogen of this severity. Parker's infection was linked to the Bedson laboratory above her, but the precise physical route by which the virus traveled to her was not established with absolute certainty. The most widely accepted explanation involves the building's ductwork and air handling systems. Air does not respect floors or locked doors, and in an older university building not purpose-built for this level of biosafety, the physical separation between a Variola laboratory and the rooms below it may not have been adequate. But investigators were careful to note that the exact transmission pathway remained a matter of reconstruction rather than direct observation. What was not uncertain was the condition of the facility and the decisions that had kept it running. The root cause of this accident is not a single catastrophic event. It is a slower failure, an institution that recognized a safety gap and did not close it in time. A researcher who, by most accounts, believed in the work he was doing and may have underestimated the risk. And a regulatory environment that had not yet matched the new post-eradication world, where the justification for keeping live Variola needed to be weighed far more rigorously against the cost of a breach. The human consequences extended beyond Parker. Her mother contracted smallpox as well, though she survived. Professor Bedson, who was reportedly devastated by what had happened, died by suicide before the inquiry concluded. 2 deaths then, traced back to a facility that the evidence suggests should have been upgraded or closed before the accident ever occurred. The shooter inquiry's findings drove significant and lasting reform. In the United Kingdom, the regulation of dangerous pathogens was substantially tightened. The rules governing which facilities could handle the most hazardous biological agents, under what conditions, and with what oversight, were rebuilt around the lesson that a recognized deficiency cannot be allowed to persist while live work continues. Internationally, the 1978 accident accelerated the already ongoing conversation about consolidating all remaining variola stocks to just 2 officially sanctioned repositories, one at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta and one at the Vector Institute in Russia. That consolidation happened in 1983 and remains the policy today. The episode also forced a harder question that science has never fully resolved. What is the right level of risk to accept in order to study a pathogen that no longer threatens the public, but whose secrets might still matter? Researchers argued then, and some argue now, that maintaining live variola samples under rigorous conditions serves legitimate scientific purposes. Critics counter that the accident in Birmingham demonstrated exactly what a near miss looks like when the containment assumptions are wrong, and that the appropriate response to eradication is not continued study, but permanent destruction. That debate has not been settled. What is settled is that the 1978 Birmingham outbreak revealed something uncomfortable about how institutions manage the distance between what their safety standards say and what their physical conditions actually deliver. The danger was documented. The gap was known. The decision to continue working with one of the most dangerous pathogens in human history in a facility that did not fully meet the required standards was made by people who presumably did not believe the worst would happen. It did happen. And because it happened in 1978, the years of debate and reform that followed have shaped every biosafety framework for high-consequence pathogens that exists today. The accident did not make science more dangerous. It made the people responsible for dangerous science more accountable for the gap between a written standard and a real one. Janet Parker remains in the historical record the last person to die from smallpox. That distinction was not inevitable. It was the product of a failure that was recognized too late and of reforms that came after. The question of whether those reforms are sufficient and whether the remaining live samples of variola should still exist at all is one that scientists, ethicists, and governments continue to debate today. This content is for educational purposes only. Do not attempt to recreate any described experiment or procedure.